Hey, good morning, guys. It's wonderful to see you all here this morning. Let's take a moment to pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you.
Every week we did a newsletter, and on Monday was print day for this newsletter. It was called the Ramser Visitor. The name of the church was Ramser Baptist Church. So the staff, all day Monday, we would lay it out. We would then put it on a template, and then we'd put it on an A.B. Dick print machine. You'd put the ink in there, spread that ink. If that machine broke down, you had to call someone from Dallas to come out and get it. It is amazing how much technology has changed. But with the dawn of computers, then I don't know why these people sit around and make up viruses to destroy other people's computer and stop work. They want to steal your data. They just want to blow your computer up. And a lot of times, it comes in an email, and it looks like a company that you use and you trust. And they always say, don't click on that email. You click on it, boom, you're ushering in this virus, whatever. I have a cousin. I'm not sure, he's a cousin of some sort. His name is Tim Schimmel, and he's a little bit older than me because he's my grandfather's brother's son. So I don't know what the generations there are. But Tim Schimmel, at this time, was a professor at the University of Pittsburgh, and he taught computer cybersecurity, and he was also a consultant for the government. Well, 15, 20 years ago, I don't know what it was, there was this huge virus that was out there that was going into like all of these mainframes, and it was really destroying companies and doing all this damage and everything. And they went after him, and my cousin was on that team that helped find this guy, and it was literally a guy sitting in his boxer shorts in a little grubby apartment in Berlin, Germany, and he was sitting there doing malicious stuff with viruses when they busted down the door and arrested him. And he said it was pretty cool because we were all watching it on the computer. We were watching what he was doing, and sure enough, it stopped the exact same time, all this stuff. But viruses, and what we're looking at today in our study of God's Word is Paul is warning the early church about a virus. He's warning the church that there's something that's going to be coming to you that looks great, but you don't need to be clicking on it. You don't need to be clicking on it. So we started this study of Philippians and how to live back in, I believe it was October. I don't know. We finished the Finding Peace series, and then we went into this book of Philippians. And so here we are in our 10th week of the book of Philippians, taking a little break for Christmas and for New Year's. We're in chapter 3 and verse number 1. And what I like about this, let's read this together. First 3 verses of chapter 3. It says this: "Finally, my brothers, rejoice in the Lord. To write the same things to you is no trouble to me and is safe for you. Look out for the dogs, look out for the evildoers, look out for those who mutilate the flesh. For we are the circumcision who worship by the Spirit of God and glory in Christ Jesus and put no confidence in the flesh." Now, this is a really, really neat way for him to say, finally, my brothers, I want you to rejoice in the Lord. Joy is a theme of the book of Philippians. And Paul, whenever he thought of the Philippian church and whenever he writes to this church, he is overjoyed with them. He has a very intimate relationship with them because he won them to the Lord. That's how the church got started. He went to Philippi. He saw this group of women down by the river. There was no Jewish synagogue in the city. He went down by the river. He began to talk with them. He leads this lady to the Lord. She accepts Christ and she says, okay, I want you to come back with this truth to my house. I want you to come to my family, to my children, to all of my servants, and I want you to share this same thing, the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so from there, here we are 10 years later, and a lot of people have been saved. A lot of people have been reached with the gospel. And Paul was very, very fond of this church. Of all Paul's letters, he uses the most words of affection with this church more than he does with the church at Corinth or Galatia or Ephesus or in Rome. He is very endeared to these people. He loves these people. And we remember last week we talked about Timothy and Epaphroditus, where he wanted to send them to the church. And this was going to be a good thing. He said they're going to benefit you. They're going to help you. They generally care about you. They're generally concerned about you. Now he's going, there's some other people going to come, and you need to be aware of these because they do not care about you. They do not care about the mission of the church. They don't care about the gospel. And he says this, first of all, to write the same things to you is no trouble to me and is safe for you. So Paul is saying here we need to be aware of what we know. Be aware of what we know. Be aware of what we have been taught. And Paul uses this over and over. In our study on Wednesdays, going through the book of 1 Corinthians, Paul said the exact same thing where he's wanting to send Timothy to them. And he says, he will vouch for me that everything that I'm teaching you, church at Corinth, I'm teaching in other places also. I'm telling every church this exact same thing. There's a consistency to it. And so Paul says, you want to be safe, you need to worry about the same things. He's repeating what he has taught them before. And reputation is needed to truly learn. I want you to learn this. I want you to know it inside and out. I want you to examine this. And he says, it's no trouble for me to repeat myself. It is no trouble for me, and it is safe for you. Now, why is it important that he keeps saying the same things? First of all, it's important because these things are true. And the new things, the new teachers, are what they're saying is not true. Is not true. You need to know the truth. You need to know the truth. My message is consistent. It is the same thing I said to you before. I am saying the same things to you as I said before. There's nothing more you have to know. I gave you this when I first came to Philippi, and the woman got saved there. The Philippian jailer got saved, and more people in these years had come to know Christ. I'm saying the same things to you because this is what is going to continue to reach people with the gospel of Jesus Christ. These same things. Now, you probably haven't read about this yet in the newspaper, but our basketball team in Trussville finished tied for first in the league. Now, you just keep a watch on AL.com or something. I'm sure there are going to be several articles coming out about it. Probably watch on 30-30 on ESPN. There'll probably be a mini-series about our season. We finished the season, what is it, Gabe, 7-1? Is that what we finished, 7-1? Now, we lost one game by 5. Now, I couldn't be there that game. I had to have my assistant coach. And I hate to my assistant coach is really wonderful. I hate to throw him under the bus, but get ready. Hang on, everybody hang on. We just threw him under the bus because we lost that game. Well, we had to play that team the other day, and we beat them by 5. We lost to them the first time by 5. We beat them by 5. But we tied for first in the league. But in our basketball practices, we do the same things over and over. Every team I've ever coached, we've got these drills. We're going to start off with this, then we go to this drill, and we're going to go to this drill. And now we're going to stop. We're going to do free throws. Then we're going to walk through our offense. We're going to walk through our plays. We're going to walk what you're supposed to do. Same thing over and over and over, over and over and over, over and over and over. Repetition, 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 because that's how you win games, doing the basic things. Now, apart from the service, let me just tell you, we were playing the worst team in the league on Thursday night, and we were down by 11 in the first half. We couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. If it weren't for Gabe Maynard, we wouldn't even be in it. But when we rattled off 11 straight and we got back in it, we were only down by 2 at the end of the half. But then in the second half, Xander Wallace, who had no points in the first half. He ended with 25. I'm telling you, this boy said, welcome to my school. This is my court. Hey, you want to play this game? I'll show you. That's nothing to do with this sermon. Except that he pays attention in practice. He pays attention in practice. And I just kept going over to him on the bench going, Xander, please, you got to take off. No, my shot's off. I just can't hit. No, I just can't hit. Then get closer to the basket. And so he sure did. To the tune of 25 points. I think we beat him by 27 or something like that. Anyway, the same thing. So Paul is going to them, listen, I'm going to say the same thing to you now that I said to you, the very first believer in Philippi, the exact same things. It bears repeating. What once was, still is. Know the constants. Beware of the new. These same things are safe for you. Incredible, incredible description there. So he says, be aware of what you know, but he's also saying you need to be aware of others, and I need you to look out. I need you to look out. I need you to have a heads up. I need you to be aware of what's coming because you know the same things. That's going to protect you from those that are coming in and are going to be saying something different, something contrary to what I have said, what this doctrine is. The same thing that I'm telling you that I've told every other church. It is the same thing. So you need to be aware of those things. Watch out. How many of you taught a teenager how to drive? Anybody? Oh my goodness. How many times? Now, when we bought Abby a car, the people we bought it from is a great Christian man, and I said, John, please pray over this car that Abby's going to take. My daughter, and she's at work this morning, she has no clue about driving. She's been driving the longest of my two kids, and she has no clue. Several months ago, it was back in, I think, November. I don't know. It was on a Monday night, and she had to be at UAB for a ceremony. And so we were trying to go all together so we didn't have to park and take separate cars. So Sandy was trying to get home. She'd taken off early. She couldn't get home through the traffic. They closed down Argo Margaret Road between us and the Highway 11 because of a wreck. So I regretfully, I went to Abby and I said, Abby, we're going to have to just take a car. I've called Mommy. She's turned around. She's going back down to UAB right now. And Abby goes, okay, well, we got 35 minutes. I can get us there in 35 minutes. This is in rush hour traffic. It's pouring down rain. I got into her car, and I'm not kidding, my hands were trembling as I buckled my seatbelt. And she turns over to me and she goes, Daddy, I don't want to hear about my driving. Just let me do it. I can get us there. I'm like, oh my stars. We tore through the neighborhood on like two wheels, went out onto Argo Margaret Road, turned right, and she took me this back way through Moody that she knows. There was cows flying, pigs were going everywhere, cars were coming at us on these one-lane little paths. I didn't even know these were roads. I thought we were turning into somebody's driveway, and it was some road that she was going to, and pretty soon we ended up on I-59, and I kid you not, we flew down there. I got down there, I was so sick to my stomach. And I was a nervous wreck because when you're with Abby, you have to say, stop, Abby, watch out. Do you see that car? Do you watch what you're doing? She hadn't been driving very long. In downtown Springville, she came up so fast on a sheriff that he followed her, pulled her over, and said, young lady, you about hit me and rear-ended me. She said, no, I didn't. He goes, yes, you did. And then she said, well, my dad said he's got to fix my brakes. Well, you need to tell your dad he needs to get them brakes fixed because there wasn't nothing wrong with her brakes. She's just flying up on it. Your cute little blonde hair. I'm sorry, officer. My dad's an idiot and don't take care of my car. Oh, my goodness. Have anybody ever ridden with Abby? I'm telling you, everybody says the same thing. You just want to go, Abby, you need to look out. Look out. Be aware. You know, I care about her. That's why I say that. And that's why Paul is saying to this church at Philippi, he says, I love you, church. I need you to be aware of this. I need you to be cautious of this because I love you, but I love you more. What I love more than you is the gospel of Jesus Christ because I want to see people reached with the gospel. And these people that are coming, they're not Timothy and Epaphroditus. They don't generally care for you. They have an agenda. You need to be careful. You need to watch out for them. Keep watch. Now, the people that he's talking about, look here in verse 2. Look out for the dogs. Look out for the evildoers. Look out for those who mutilate the flesh. Now, this sounds horrible. Who are these people? Who are these people? It's like an invading army that's coming to the church at Philippi. Listen, in every age there is false teaching, and false teaching is always the same. It doesn't matter the generation, it doesn't matter the time, it is the exact same thing. It is wrapped differently, it may have some different things, but it's going to be false teaching. These people that were coming were probably the most spiritual people of this day. They became known as Judaizers. So what they were was born-again Jews who were coming to the churches and saying, unless you live as a Jew, you cannot be saved. Unless you live as a Jew, you cannot be spiritual. You can't be spiritual. So let me tell you this. Satan doesn't go after the ones that he's already got. He doesn't have to. You know who he comes after? The elect, the redeemed, the ones that are followers of Jesus Christ. That's who he comes after. And it's always in this innocent-looking email. Just click on it. You can trust me. You could trust me. Well, Paul had to deal with this issue before. Back in the early church, if we go back to Acts chapter 15. So the church hasn't been in existence very long. But they're seeing people saved. The church is growing leaps and bounds. The gospel is going forward. I mean, people are being saved. Gentiles are being saved. And the gospel was revolutionary because it was to the Jew first, but also to the Greek, to the Gentile. It took women and made them equal with Jesus Christ. So it was men and women. It was people who were slaves, who were free. It brought all of these people together through the gospel of Jesus Christ. And Acts chapter 15 then, throughout all of this growth and through the power of the gospel, all of a sudden some Jews started teaching, no, you Gentiles, you got to live as a Jew, you got to be a Jew, or you're not really saved. Look at verse number 1. Now, I don't have this on the screen, I don't think, but we'll get to the verse 6 here in just a second. Some men came down from Judea and were teaching the brothers, unless you are circumcised according to the custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. And after Paul and Barnabas had no small dissension and debate with them, Paul and Barnabas and some of the others were appointed to go up to Jerusalem to the apostles and the elders about this question. So kind of the central place for all things Christ at this time was the Jewish church, or it was the Jerusalem church. That's where everything was coming out of. All of the people were sent out of that because that was the birthplace right there where they'd come to Christ. So being sent out by their church, they passed through both Phoenicia and Samaria, describing in detail to these churches the conversion of the Gentiles. And look what happened. It brought great joy to all the brothers. When they came to Jerusalem, they were welcomed by the church and the apostles and the elders, and they declared all that God had done with them. But some believers who belonged to the party of the Pharisees, they rose up and said, it is necessary to circumcise all of these Gentiles in order for them to and they must keep the law of Moses. Well, the apostles and the elders, verse 6, were gathered together to consider this matter. And after there had been much debate, Peter stood up and said to them, now wait a minute, Peter wasn't in Jerusalem. Peter was out winning the Gentiles to Christ. So they've threatened his entire ministry. And instead of him outreaching people with the gospel of Jesus Christ, he's got to come back to the church and deal with this legalism. So the gospel's already being hindered. And how many people didn't get saved because he's got to come back to Jerusalem and address this issue that is only going to take him from the gospel? This is the same thing. Paul's dealt with it, and now he's dealing with it in Philippi, and he's going, it's just going to stop. It's going to bring the gospel to a halt. And after there had been much debate, Peter stood up and said to them, brothers, you know that in the early days God made a choice among you, that by my mouth the Gentiles should hear the word of the gospel and believe. And God, who knows the heart, bore witness to them by giving them the Holy Spirit, just as he did to us. And he made no distinction between us and them, having cleansed their hearts by faith. Get that. No distinction between us and them, between Jew and Gentile. Now, therefore, why are you putting God to the test by placing a yoke on the neck of the disciples that neither our fathers nor we have been able to bear. You're wanting to put on them the law of Moses, and Moses couldn't handle it. And you want to give it to these Gentiles who are not even Jews? Absolutely not. We're not doing that. And he goes on, and I encourage you to read this. This was the Council of Jerusalem. They went on, they said, we have come up with some suggestions for the Gentile believers. And they gave him like a list of things. And he says, if you do these things, you will do well. But it had nothing to do with obeying the feast, had nothing to do with following the law of Moses, had nothing to do with circumcision. And yet here they are all these years later, and Paul is going, I can't believe we're having to deal with these exact same things. And Paul knew they were coming to Philippi because he's dealing with them at this time with the church at Galatia. The Judaizers had come in there and had stopped them. Paul even said to the church at Rome, which was a group of Jews and Gentiles in this church, and he says this in verse 7, 5, and 6. While we were living in the flesh, our sinful passions aroused by the law were at work in our members to bear fruit for God. But now we are released from the law, having died to that which held us captive, so that we serve in the new way of the Holy Spirit and not in the old way of the written code. So don't be distracted by it. It's going to halt you, church at Rome. It's going to halt you, church at Philippi. It's going to halt you, early church. If you take on these things, people are going to stop being saved. Look in Galatians. This is so powerful. Galatians chapter 1, verse number 6. Paul is, now this is totally different wording than used with the church at Philippi, but in verse number 6 he said, I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting him who called you in the grace of Christ and are returning to a different gospel. He's astonished by it. He's like, really, church? You're now going back and going to saddle yourself with all of this that you were saved from? And then he says, well, not that there is another gospel. There isn't another one, but there are some who trouble you and want to distort the gospel of Christ. But even if we are an angel from heaven should preach to you a gospel contrary to the one we preach to you, let him be accursed. I don't care if it's an angel in heaven that says something different than what I'm telling you. Let that angel be accursed. As we have said before, so now I say again, if anyone is preaching to you a gospel contrary to the one you received, let him be accursed. For now I am seeking the approval of man. For am I now seeking the approval of man or of God? Or am I trying to please man? If I were still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ. And look over in chapter 5. And Paul brings this thing home in verse number 7. Galatians chapter 5. He says, you were running well. Man, you were doing so good. Your faith was vibrant. You were excited about the things of God. Now he says, who hindered you from obeying the truth? This persuasion is not from him who calls you. A little leaven leavens the whole lump. I have confidence in the Lord that you will take no other view, and the one who is troubling you will bear the penalty, whoever he is. But if I, brother, still preach circumcision, why am I still being persecuted? In that case, the offense of the cross has been removed. I wish that those who unsettle you would emasculate themselves. Do you know what that word means, emasculate? And it's not just to take away your manhood. It is literally, he's saying to cut off, to castrate. And he says, I wish they would castrate themselves. Not just be castrated, but castrate themselves. That's how strong Paul feels about this, because he knows there are people that need to be saved, and you get messed up, you get involved in all this stuff, nobody's going to get saved. Nobody's going to get saved. Paul does not mince words, and he tells it exactly like it is. First of all, he says dogs. Now, dogs in this century, in this time period, were not like today. The dogs were a menace. In our modern day language, he would call them rabid rats. That would be likened to them calling these dogs. They're not like pets like what we have today. The Jews looked down on the Gentiles, and the Jews called the Gentiles dogs. And now Paul, a Jew, is calling the Jewish people dogs. These dogs are coming to you. And he says they're evildoers. Now, this is amazing to me. I'm like, man, Paul, you need to back off a little bit. These guys are well-intentioned. I mean, they're very spiritual. They're doing all these things because they want to further, their relationship with God and look better, and they want to be righteous, and they want to do all these acts and do all these things. And he calls them evildoers, not because of their evil things that they're doing that are contrary to God. Their evil things, which are their righteous acts, is what he's saying is evil. What they're teaching about circumcision and all that. Now, we get into a beautiful passage of Scripture next week of knowing Christ and the surpassing knowledge of Christ that Paul gets into. But before that, Paul goes into detail. Listen, you want to talk about a Jew? You want to talk about living as a Jew? You want to talk about being circumcised? He said, I was circumcised the 8th day. I wasn't 20-year-old as a Gentile and then heard this teaching from the Jews, and then he had to be circumcised so that he could be saved, so he did it. And he said, I wasn't this later on. I was circumcised the right way, the correct way, the royal way, as we're supposed to be as good Jews, on the 8th day specifically. That's where I am. And he says, you want to talk about a Pharisee? I'm a Pharisee of the Pharisees. I know the law like no one else. You want to talk about being able to obey the law of Moses? I knew it more than anyone else. I was the rising star among the Jews. And then what does he say about all of that? He said, I count it all as rubbish because of Jesus Christ. Now, this is good news because, religion always makes it a performance before man so that you could be pleasing to God. A performance. So I was 12 years old, and for several years I went to a very exciting youth group, but it was in a fundamental Baptist church. And I love this church, and I don't know for whatever possessed this church, but they hired me as their janitor. So after a couple of years, I'm now 14 years old. I'd been doing it for like 2 years, 20 hours a week. My mom would take me down there, or my brother would take me down to the church, drop me off in the evening several nights a week, and I would clean the church. So it was really cool because out back there was there was an alley, and then that alley there was a grocery store that backed up to it. So I could walk over to that grocery store and get me sunflower seeds. And what I was so cool was I had pocket money that I could buy the cereal that I wanted, because we didn't have good cereal at home growing up with 5 kids. So I had my own stash, like my brothers and sisters, my older brothers. I could have my own stash. This is Lucky Charms. Nobody eat my Lucky Charms. I can afford my own cereal. You guys can eat your own cornflakes and oatmeal. I'm having Lucky Charms. I had all this stuff. And I remember as a kid in my wallet, a wallet, I'm 12 years old, having like 3 or 4 checks in there from the church that I hadn't even cashed, because I didn't need to. I still had like a 20 and 3 ones, and oh, look, here's a 5. Oh, I got that. I'm going to go buy some more Lucky Charms after work. So I'm down there working. Well, after a couple of years, the pastor calls me in. I am not making this up. Fundamental Baptist Church. He calls me into his office and said, Jerry, we've got to have a standard for the staff at the church. And I'm thinking about Rob Hoffman. I'm thinking about Max Clifton, the youth pastor and the music guy, and him, Robert J. Buckner, the senior pastor. I'm thinking these guys. I'm like, oh, okay. I'm 14 years old. He goes, as staff of the church, we got to have a standard, and we need everyone's haircut to look the part. You got too long of hair, and you need to cut your hair. And I'm like going, am I up for promotion? Have I done such a good job as a janitor? I'm now going to be like doing the music, or going to be doing the youth department, or doing what? I'm like, wow. No, if I'm going to continue being the janitor of the church, he says, you got to get a haircut. A couple days later, I just said, okay, I quit. Legalism is always around, and you're not spiritual unless you do this. And I remember saying to him, no, I won't go into that. It's probably some things I shouldn't have said. But no, even we as a church, we want you to measure up before you come into the church. Why are we always shocked that sinners sin? And why are we always shocked when we see people come into Christ and then we want to add to them? Well, you now got to do this. You got to be this. You got to behave like, you got to dress like this. We still do these same things. Anywhere there's Christianity, there's legalism, and that's what this was. Hey, the Jews weren't ready to give up all the things that they were. And that was fine if they wanted to live that way, but they were saying, nope, you Gentiles got to live the same exact way. The Jerusalem Council said, we couldn't even live up to that standard. We couldn't even live up to that standard. Why are we going to put it off on them? Dogs, evildoers, mutilators of the flesh. Their religious works were evil in God's sight because they took pride in their own achievements and trusted in their good deeds as the means of making themselves right before God. Do you know what I am so thankful for? And Sandy and I purposed early in our marriage that our kids would never be exposed to that legalism. Because any kind of an outward force doesn't make you a better Christian. And it can't make you more spiritual. And it won't. It won't. You know what that's going to do for new converts? It's going to turn them off. They're like, I'm not doing that. I thought this was Christ. I thought this was Jesus Christ forgiving me. And then you're saying, no, I got to do this, this, and this, and this. That's not Christ. That's a cult. That's a cult. Look back at Philippians 1, 3 through 5. And let's look at Paul's love for these people. He says, I thank my God for you, church at Philippi, in all my remembrance of you, always in every prayer of mine for you, all making my prayer with joy because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now. And I am sure of